The world's first pilots went to war armed with bricks, grappling hooks, and a dream of conquering the clouds, a dream that would quickly become a nightmare of innovation, desperation, and unimaginable courage. Imagine climbing into a fragile wooden frame covered in fabric, an engine sputtering to life behind you, knowing you're about to ascend into a realm where the rules of combat hadn't been written yet. That was the reality for the aviators of the Great War, men who became inventors, engineers, and killers all before lunch. World War I didn't just scar the earth with trenches, it carved a brand new battlefield thousands of feet above them, where the wind howled through wire rigging and engine oil splattered across goggles. But how do you fight an enemy when your entire aircraft weighs less than a modern car? When your primary navigation tool might be following railroad tracks, and when your commander's orders are little more than educated guesses? This wasn't just warfare. This was humanity's first attempt to extend conflict into the third dimension, and the learning curve was catastrophically steep. This is the story of how, in just 4 brutal years, the aeroplane evolved from a fragile scout into a weaponized hunter, a metamorphosis driven by desperation, genius, and thousands of young men paying the ultimate price for each technological leap. We tracked the deadly evolution from those primitive observers sketching enemy trenches on notepads to the legendary aces who became modern knights, their exploits broadcast by newspapers hungry for heroes amidst the grinding horror of trench warfare. But first, we need to understand a crucial distinction that often gets lost in popular history. While German Zeppelins captured terrifying headlines for bombing London and other cities, creating a new kind of psychological warfare against civilian populations, they were fundamentally slow, vulnerable behemoths floating gas bags that consumed tremendous resources for relatively little strategic gain. The real story of air power, the transformative narrative that would echo through every subsequent conflict, was written by the winged machines, by the men who strapped themselves to engines and propellers and decided to fight where no human had ever fought before. They weren't just pilots. They were inventors of combat. Every sortie was an experiment, every dogfight a test of untried theories, and every landing brought new data if you survived to share it. In 1914, as armies mobilized across Europe, most senior generals viewed aircraft with deep skepticism, if not outright contempt. 2 men who had spent careers studying Napoleonic tactics and the lessons of the Franco-Prussian War, these noisy, unreliable contraptions were toys for wealthy enthusiasts, not instruments of war. A French general famously remarked that aviation was good sport, but for the army, the aeroplane is worthless. This sentiment was widespread in high commands across the continent. But the machine gun, that grim reaper of the trenches, would force a brutal reassessment. It quickly made traditional cavalry scouts obsolete. Horsemen who had served as the eyes of armies for centuries were now cut down in swathes before they could get close enough to observe. From the sky, however, a single pilot in a flimsy biplane could peer over no man's land past artillery lines and deep into enemy territory, observing troop concentrations, supply depots, and fortification efforts for miles in every direction. This shift from terrestrial to aerial reconnaissance was one of the war's first and most profound tactical revolutions. This simple act of observation, seeing, and reporting proved decisive in the war's opening moves. In late August 1914, during the Great Retreat following the Battle of Mons, the entire British expeditionary force faced annihilation. German forces under General Alexander von Kluck were executing a sweeping envelopment, threatening to trap and destroy Britain's small but professional army. From the air, British pilots Captain Philip Yarborough de la Ferte and Lieutenant Emma Lobo Wadham spotted the dangerous German maneuver. They raced back to deliver their report, enabling Field Marshal Sir John French to order a critical withdrawal just in time. Historians estimate this aerial intervention saved over 100,000 soldiers from death or capture, proving the airplane's strategic worth in a single, stunning moment. Yet consider the circumstances of that flight. The first men to fly over enemy lines had no weapons to defend themselves, no radios to communicate in real time, and often, due to primitive maps and non-existent navigational aids, no precise idea where they were once they left familiar landmarks behind. These early reconnaissance pilots developed ingenious, often absurd methods of navigation. Many would follow distinctive railway lines, flying low enough to read station name signs, a terrifyingly vulnerable practice. Others, hopelessly lost, would land in open fields to ask astonished farmers or villagers for directions, a practice that blurred the lines between combat mission and polite inquiry. Communication was perhaps the greatest hurdle. Without wireless sets, vital intelligence had to be carried physically back to headquarters. This meant a pilot, after perhaps 2 hours of careful observation, would land at his home airfield, sprint to a waiting car or motorcycle, and then drive to command to deliver a verbal report, a process that could take hours, by which time the information might be obsolete. The critical need for timely, accurate data drove the first major technological push, aerial photography. Germany, with its advanced optical industry, led this charge. Engineers developed specialized cameras using glass plate negatives, mounted in heavy wooden housings that were then strapped awkwardly to the aircraft's fuselage or struts. Early attempts were comical pilots leaning out with handheld cameras, blurry images ruined by vibration, but soon, automated shutter mechanisms triggered by timers or altimeters and vibration-dampening mounts produced startlingly clear images. French and British intelligence officers developed sophisticated photo interpretation techniques, learning to identify artillery emplacements by shadow length, to distinguish dummy trenches from real ones, and to track troop movements by disturbed earth. This transformation from sketchy verbal reports to precise photographic evidence made the reconnaissance plane not just valuable, but indispensable, and consequently, it made them the single most critical target in the sky. Protecting your own eyes and blinding the enemies became the central strategic goal of the air war. Which brings us to the obvious, deadly question. How do you stop them? How do you bring down an enemy plane when your own aircraft is designed for observation, not combat? The early interactions between opposing aviators had a strange chivalry. Pilots would wave as they passed, a fellowship of pioneers in a deadly new element. But as the war on the ground descended into industrialized slaughter, this courtesy evaporated. The first weapons were whatever was at hand. There are documented accounts of pilots hurling bricks, lengths of chain, and even grappling hooks with ropes attached, hoping to snag an enemy's propeller or tangle their control wires. A French pilot claimed to have dropped small steel darts, called flechettes, by the handful from a bag. Unsurprisingly, these methods were spectacularly ineffective. The first lethal encounter came not from a weapon, but from a weaponized aircraft itself. On September 8, 1914, Russian staff Captain Pyotr Nesterov, frustrated by the inability to intercept an Austrian reconnaissance plane, chose to ram it with his own Morin-Saulnier monoplane. Both aircraft crashed, killing all occupants. Nesterov's desperate sacrificial act sent a chilling message. A dedicated practical aerial weapon was urgently needed. The era of peaceful observation was over. The breakthrough came from a simple, brutal idea: mount a machine gun. But the engineering challenge was monumental. In a tractor configuration plane engine in front, the propeller arc blocked any forward-firing field. Early solutions were as dangerous to the user as the target. Some aircraft, like the British Vickers FB-5 gunboat, adopted a pusher configuration, placing the engine and propeller behind the crew. This gave the front-mounted gunner an unobstructed field of fire, but created a draggy, slow, and unstable airframe that was easy prey for more agile tractor planes. Another approach, tried by Frenchman Roland Garros working with aircraft manufacturer Morin-Saulnier, was to fit the propeller blades themselves with steel wedge-shaped deflectors. The theory was that bullets striking the blades would be safely deflected. Garros scored several victories with this system in April 1915, but its flaws were fatal. Deflected bullets often fragmented into deadly shrapnel that could damage the engine or fuel lines, and the system was completely incompatible with German steel-jacketed ammunition, which shattered on impact. When Garros was forced down behind enemy lines due to engine failure likely caused by his own deflected fire, his aircraft was captured, providing the Germans with both a warning and an inspiration. The captured Morin-Saulnier was sent directly to the Fokker aircraft factory and placed before a brilliant Dutch engineer named Anthony Fokker. Rather than copying the flawed deflector system, Fokker and his team perfected a mechanical synchronization device, the interrupter gear. This intricate camrod mechanism, linked to the engine's crankshaft, physically prevented the machine gun from firing whenever a propeller blade was directly in front of the muzzle. It was a masterpiece of precision mechanical timing. The result was the Fokker EI Indica monoplane, a modest aircraft in most respects, but one that could fire a concentrated stream of bullets straight ahead through its own propeller disc. This single innovation created the first true purpose-built fighter plane and ushered in a period of German dominance known as the Fokker Scourge. The era of the technological dogfight had officially begun. Now, with a viable forward-firing weapon, the focus shifted from engineering to employment. How do you use this new tool? Tactics and pilot training had to evolve at breakneck speed, written in blood with each engagement. The Germans, led by the visionary tactician Oswald Boelcke, made the first systematic study of aerial combat. Boelcke, already an ace, distilled his experience into a set of fundamental principles known as the Dicta Boelcke. These rules secure all advantages before attacking. Always continue an attack once begun. Fire only at close range and only when your opponent is properly in your sights. Formed the first textbook of air combat. More importantly, Boelcke championed the creation of specialized fighter units, the Jahrgangsstaffeln or hunting squadrons. He understood that individual heroes were less effective than coordinated teams. His most famous protege, the man who would embody the public's imagination of the fighter ace, was a young, aristocratic Prussian cavalry officer who transferred to the air service, Manfred von Richthofen. Manfred von Richthofen, the Red Baron, was a complex figure-part calculating hunter, part Medea Savi celebrity, after Boelcke's death in a mid-air collision. Richthofen took command of Jasta 11. He adopted an amplified Boelcke's tactical discipline, but added his own flair for psychological warfare. He had his Albatross fighter painted a brilliant, unmistakable red. Squadron Jasta 11 decorated their aircraft in vivid, individual colors: yellows, blues, greens, earning them the nickname the Flying Circus, both for their bright appearance and their practice of traveling by train to different sections of the front. Richthofen understood the value of morale, both for his own men and as a weapon against the enemy. The sight of that blood-red triplane or the swirling colors of his circus could paralyze inexperienced Allied pilots. In the hands of aces like him, aircraft became extensions of their will, and the goal evolved from individual duels to a broader concept. Air superiority is a permanent domination of the airspace to blind the enemy and enable your own ground forces. This German tactical and technological edge led to periods of terrifying dominance, most infamously Bloody April in 1917. As the British prepared for the Battle of Arras, their Royal Flying Corps was ordered to maintain continuous air observation over the German lines, regardless of cost. They flew obsolete aircraft like the BE-2 and FE-2B against the latest German Albatros D-3 fighters, flown by experienced aces like Richthofen. The result was a slaughter. The RFC lost 245 aircraft that month, with 211 airmen killed or missing and 108 taken prisoner. British replacement pilots during this period had an average life expectancy of just 11 days. Yet, even in this catastrophe, there was grim purpose. The RFC's sacrificial persistence provided the British Army with the aerial photographs and artillery spotting it desperately needed for the ground offensive. The air war was never detached from the mud below. It was always in service to it. The technological arms race was relentless and global. As soon as one side fielded a superior machine, the other scrambled to match or surpass it. When Germany introduced the nimble Albatros D-3 with its twin synchronized Spandau machine guns, the Allies responded with their own legendary aircraft. The British produced the Sopwith Camel, a plane that perfectly illustrates the trade-offs of aerial engineering. Its unique rotary engine, where the entire cylinders and crankcase spun with a propeller, created tremendous gyroscopic forces. This made the Camel incredibly maneuverable in the hands of an expert, allowing violent turns that could outrotate any contemporary German fighter. But that same characteristic made it treacherous for beginners. A mishandled Camel could spin into the ground with terrifying ease. It was a weapon that demanded and created elite pilots. Meanwhile, the French developed the Spad S-13, a sturdy, fast aircraft powered by a powerful Hispano-Suiza V8 engine. It lacked the Camel's razor-edge agility but offered blazing speed and rugged construction, making it an excellent boom and zoom fighter and a stable gun platform. These aircraft, arriving in numbers by mid-1917, finally ended the German qualitative advantage and began to tip the scales back toward the Allies. Yet perhaps the most iconic plane of the war, the Fokker docked-eye triplane, is also the most misunderstood. Its 3 short wings gave it an astonishing rate of climb and a roll rate that seemed almost supernatural. It was this aircraft, painted red, that Richthofen flew during his final, most famous campaigns. However, the docked-eye was plagued by structural flaws. Several aircraft suffered wing failures in flight, leading to temporary grounding. Richthofen himself scored only 19 of his 80 victories in the docked-eye. The majority were achieved in Albatross biplanes. The triplane's legendary status is a testament more to the myth of the Red Baron than to its objective superiority. It was a brilliant but flawed specialist's tool. The story of bombers in WWI is one of ambition outpacing capability. The strategic bombing, the idea of attacking an enemy's industrial heartland to cripple its ability to wage war, was born here, but its execution was primitive. Early bombers were often two-seat reconnaissance planes from which the observer would simply drop modified artillery shells or small bombs by hand over the side. Dedicated heavy bombers did emerge, like the formidable German Gotha G4 and the massive four-engine Zeppelin Stucken R. Beyond the Western Front, the air war took on different characters. In the skies over Italy and Austria-Hungary, daring pilots fought in the dramatic alpine landscape where downdrafts and mountain peaks were as dangerous as enemy guns. Over the Middle Eastern deserts, aircraft operated in blistering heat and sandstorms, performing reconnaissance that guided the Arab revolt in the campaigns of Allenby and Lawrence. Naval aviation, though in its infancy, saw the first aircraft launched from ships, the first torpedo attacks, and the burgeoning recognition that control of the seas might one day require control of the air above them. The human dimension of this story is perhaps its most compelling. Who were these men? They were a diverse group: former cavalry officers like Richthofen who missed the charge, mechanics who understood the machines intimately, adventurers from neutral countries like the Lafayette Escadrille, Americans who fought for France before their own nation entered the war, and even a few pioneering women like Marie Marvingt who flew bombing missions for France disguised as a man. They lived in a strange, suspended reality. On the ground, they enjoyed our officers' lifestyle, often far removed from the trench. Soldiers better food, comfortable billets in chateaus, a sense of elite camaraderie. In the air, they faced a very personal, very visible form of death, fire, a spinning fall, or the impact of bullets, inches from their cockpit. This contrast created a unique psychology, a mix of fatalistic gallantry and technical obsession. By the war's end in 1918, the airplane had been utterly transformed, and with it, the very nature of warfare. From a tool of observation, it had become a versatile weapon system: fighter, bomber, ground attack aircraft, and naval scout. The lessons written in blood over the Western Front, the imperative of technological innovation, the need for specialized training, the supreme importance of centralized control and organization of their assets were codified. Most symbolically, on April 1, 1918, the British merged their Royal Flying Corps and Royal Naval Air Service to form the Royal Air Force, the world's first independent air force, no longer a subordinate arm of the Army or Navy. This institutional recognition was as significant as any technological breakthrough. The knight of the skies, the lone chivalrous duelist, was gone. In his place stood the military aviator, part of a complex industrial-scale system of war. The legacy of these 4 years echoes in every contrail in a conflict zone today. The very concepts of air superiority, strategic bombing, close air support. The first war in the air was humanity's violent, accelerated adolescence in the third dimension. It was a laboratory where the rules were made, broken, and rewritten with every flight, often by young men in their 20s. The courage of those early aviators, facing not only enemy guns but also the fundamental uncertainties of primitive technology and engine failure, structural collapse, disorientation, forged the very concept of air power. They took a novelty, a sporting device, and turned it into a decisive instrument of national power in the span of a single, horrific war. If you followed this journey into the clouds, from bricks to interrupter gears, from lonely scouts to coordinated flying circuses, you understand why this history matters. It's not just a tale of obsolete machines. It's the origin story of a domain that defines modern conflict. They fought where no one had fought before, and in doing so, they changed the landscape of war forever, casting its shadow onto the land below and into every decade that followed. For winds of thought, this is a story of human ingenuity under the most extreme pressure imaginable. It's about how necessity becomes the mother of invention, even when that invention is a more efficient way to conduct slaughter. If this exploration gave you a new perspective on this pivotal moment, if it connected the dots between those fragile biplanes and the jet fighters of today, then do the channel a solid and hit the like button. It genuinely helps us continue to dig into these forgotten chapters of history, to understand how we got here. What forgotten innovation or pivotal moment from technological history would you want us to cover next? Is it the development of the tank in that same war, the race to break the sound barrier, or something else entirely? Let us know in the comments below. The conversation is a big part of this journey.